disgraced former doctor Robert Ricketson was every patient's worst nightmare. On January 29, 2001, Reverend Arturo Iturralde, a resident of the Big Island, was admitted to Hilo Hospital for pains regarding a lower back. His surgeon, Dr. Ricketson, took Arturo to surgery with the expectation of implanting a titanium rod into his spine. Instead, in the surgery room, Ricketson grabbed a stainless steel screwdriver and used a hacksaw to cut off the handle and a piece of the blade. Then he intentionally inserted this sawed-off screwdriver instead of a titanium rod into Arturo's spine and tightened it into place with screws designed for the titanium rod. At no time did he inform anybody that the screwdriver, which was never approved for human implantation, had been used in lieu of the titanium medical device. Even the hospital prohibited staff personnel from entering the room to further support Ricketson's concealment of the incident. Days after the January 29, 2001 surgery, the screwdriver snapped in half. Arturo suffered 3 more corrective surgeries before becoming an incontinent, bedridden paraplegic who was dependent on the care of his sister. Arturo, an ordained Baptist minister who mostly spoke Spanish, died June 18th at the age of 76. But before Arturo was ever wheeled into Ricketson's operating room, Ricketson had had at least 7 medical malpractice suits filed against him, and his medical license had already been suspended in Oklahoma, revoked in Texas, and was being reviewed in Hawaii according to medical board documents from 3 states. In one of the malpractice suits, an Oklahoma woman was awarded $1.3 million after she went to Ricketson for a ruptured disc in her back. He was under the influence of narcotics during her operation. The woman now wears a diaper and walks only with a walker. Documents from medical boards in Oklahoma and Texas stated Ricketson had become addicted to narcotics because he was self-treating chronic back pain. The documents said he wrote fake prescriptions for the drugs and even stole them from his patients. Ricketson had shown previous evidence of drug abuse and incompetence in other states and should have never been allowed to step foot into an operating room. Amazingly, despite the evidence documented in his medical board files in Oklahoma and Texas, Ricketson was allowed to practice surgery at Hilo Medical Center and with Hawaii Orthopedics Inc. So how is it possible that dangerous and deadly doctors like Ricketson are allowed to move from state to state to continue maiming and even killing patients because of their incompetence and negligence? And how many patients die each year because of them? In 2013, the prestigious Journal of Patient Safety published a study that as many as 440,000 patients die each year from preventable medical errors. That would make medical errors the 3rd leading cause of death in America, behind heart disease and cancer, which is 2nd. These people are not dying from the illnesses that caused them to seek hospital care in the first place. No, they are dying from mistakes that hospitals could have prevented. A New England Journal of Medicine, January 28, 2016 study reported that 1% of physicians accounted for 32% of paid malpractice claims over the last 10 years. The ugly truth is that little is being done to hold these dangerous doctors accountable. Researchers found that bad doctors showed distinctive characteristics, including having paid previous malpractice claims. So it stands to reason that healthcare providers could eliminate 1/3 of medical malpractice along with patients' pain and suffering, as well as the added cost of corrective surgeries, long-term care, and indemnity payments by removing the worst 1% of doctors. Why aren't bad doctors stopped from practicing? The answer lies, at least partially, in the National Practitioner Data Bank, a clearinghouse for information on medical malpractice that Congress established in 1986 to help state licensing boards police the healthcare industry. The national database was supposed to help states identify dangerous doctors and prevent them from harming more patients, and is used by hospitals, insurers, and licensing boards to track doctors' records, check prospective hires, and make other decisions. But it is virtually useless in holding doctors accountable because, by federal law, none are listed by name. They are assigned a random number to protect their identities. Even if doctors were identified in the data as they should be, the public would still be barred by law from accessing the records. So vulnerable, sick patients sit in the waiting rooms of bad physicians without a clue about their poor record of performance. And in many cases, a negligent doctor's insurance company pays the victim of malpractice and the doctor goes back to work. If a doctor develops a bad enough reputation in one town, he can move to a new state and continue practicing. This is unbelievable. But today, the public does not have access to the database to identify doctors' names and addresses, to identify doctors with uniquely long histories of being sued or disciplined for medical malpractice. Because on September 1st, 2011, the government cut off public access. Had it not been for a very brave nurse, Janelle Feldmeyer, a really true-life whistleblower, who had been in the operating room with Ricketson on the same day of surgery, who first tried to talk him out of using the screwdriver shaft and argued that the family needed to be told of the substitution of the screwdriver part, the truth might not have ever been known. Janelle was morally outraged. She had the courage to bring the truth out. After the surgery, she retrieved the metal pieces from the trash and took them to Mark Davis, partner at Davis Levin Livingston. Arturo learned about the screwdriver after the second surgery. Here's Janelle today to tell that horrific story of that fateful day.
As a support staff, it was my job to find if one of the packages or part of the instrument set didn't get opened or wasn't present in the room, and to notify the OR supervisor and also the instrumentation company that we had a problem in the operating room that was emergent. And we set out to A, find the instruments, and to B, contact the company that had shipped this entire surgical set to us. While the process of searching for the instruments or confirming with the surgical instrumentation company was happening, Dr. Ricketson, in the meantime, still in the operating room with Mr. Iturralde, had made an alternative decision and decided to cut apart a screwdriver from the set that he had in the operating room and use that screwdriver in lieu of the titanium rods that are used for surgical fixation of the spine. Mark Davis was the lawyer that I came into contact with. He sought me out after the information regarding Mr. Iturralde's first and second surgeries had come to him. He had more surgeries than that, by the way. Had come to him, and the instrumentation had been delivered to him. He contacted me to give him what information that I had regarding Mr. Iturralde's care. And the first and foremost thing that I would say is that Mark Davis never came to me as a lawyer pushing an agenda or having a drive to have a certain thing said or a certain thing done. He merely presented me with an opportunity to share an experience that I had, and he never had an itinerary for me. He never had a script for me to follow. He never had a word that he wanted me to say or a sentence that he wanted me to pronounce a certain way. He never had an agenda. He allowed me to simply relate to the courts and to the jury, and to even subsequently to this program and its editors and its project managers, to relate to you today an event that took place without any kind of an agenda attached to it. And I appreciate that. Mark Davis is a person that I respect and that I trust. And in retrospect, when I look back, I would be very happy as the Iturralde family that they had such a person whom I believe is a fine example of a legal scholar and just a really great human being, that he ended up being the person representing them. and he's a person of honor and dignity.
In this Insider exclusive Network TV special, When Doctors Go Wrong, Arturo Iturralde's story, our news team is on location in Honolulu meeting with Mark Davis, partner at Davis, Levin Livingston, who successfully represented Arturo's family, to discuss the specific legal challenges and strategies to win this case with a $5.6 million verdict. Mark has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. Mark has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Hawaii and across the nation. He has seen many innocent and hardworking people injured and killed by negligent and incompetent doctors, hospitals, and nurses. Mark's passion is problem solving. He approaches each medical negligence case as the scientist trying to solve a puzzle. He has seen many patients suffer needless injury. And because of that, he is driven to help people who have been harmed by incompetent and negligent doctors. His goal? To make medicine safer and more accountable, and of course, to get justice for his clients. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Honolulu, Hawaii. It is my great pleasure to introduce Mark Davis to the show. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm, what type of law you practice, a little bit about yourself.
The firm was founded 40 years ago, a little over 40 years ago. All four of the founding partners had come from public interest backgrounds. I was a civil rights lawyer with the ACLU. Another partner was with Legal Services. Another partner was with National Prison Project for ACLU, and another one was executive director of Common Cause. So we all had this experience of, using litigation for the public interest. And when we decided to move into private practice and handle private cases, we always felt that it was important for us to continue to maintain some of our public interest work. So we continuously have a group of civil rights cases and public interest cases that we pursue. And more so, we have tried to select the cases that we've handled over the course of 4 decades to cases that might have an impact to change the way things are. And that's one of the big issues that we have felt has been so important in the tort world, is that you're able to perhaps make a difference with regard to how issues with regard to safety and medical practice and so on may be changed permanently. And that's been, personally for me, one of the more satisfying aspects of practicing law is the idea that what we do we're invested in because we feel it's important and has an opportunity to change.
I understand also that one of the organizations that you were the president of before, and the only member, by the way, of the bar from the state of Hawaii, was the Inner Circle of Advocates,
That's
right?
Correct.
What do they do, by the way?
So this is a group of, I think, who are probably the top plaintiffs' lawyers in the country, some of whom are civil rights lawyers, some of whom do all sorts of work. But they are lawyers that are not litigators in the sense that they never go to court, but these are trial lawyers, the people who really make their living inside the courtroom. And it's a collective group in which we share strategies and ideas and also friendships. There are the people in this group that are some of my closest friends, people that I would do anything for, they would do anything for me. And we are constantly consulting on how to do a better job, how to hone our skills. And that's kind of the meat of the issue. It's not a political organization. It's all about, improving your lawyering skills. And it's been a great honor to serve that organization as president and to, as of today, continue to be an active member.
Mark, today we are here talking about another case of yours, a client who had a horrible thing happen to him in a medical malpractice case. His name was Arturo Iturralde. Tell our audience who Arturo was, please.
He is Reverend Iturralde. He was a minister in his local church on the Big Island. And he was a very beloved, respected individual among his family and his parishioners and other people that knew him. Well loved. He was a large, heavy-set fellow, and who had some chronic back issues that led him to consult a physician in Hilo and Hilo Hospital.
And what did that physician recommend to him?
Right. So after doing some preliminary examinations, they recommended that he have a laminectomy with the insertion of titanium rods to support his spine. And it was a surgery which they predicted would perhaps provide him a great deal of relief, allow him to walk and be mobile again. And, it's a fairly it's a serious surgery, but something that is routine and for this type of an ailment.
This is where this case gets interesting, because there happened to be a doctor there. His name was Robert Ricketson, and he had practiced medicine, as you discovered in your case against him, in other states, Oklahoma, Texas, and I think maybe Kansas, right? And he had finally moved out to Hawaii. Before we talk about what happened to Arturo, tell our audience a little bit about the doctor and his background.
Well, of course, we never knew any of this before, and neither did Reverend Iturralde. But he was a orthopedic surgeon, and he had been credentialed by the hospital authorities at the Hilo Hospital. Hilo is a second largest city in Hawaii. It's located on the island of Hawaii. It generally does not have a lot of tourists, but it it's a city of about 60,000 people, and they have a prominent hospital. It's generally a rural community. It's the location of the base of the volcano that everybody hears about. But in terms of it being distant from the mainland, it's about as far as you can get. And of course, one always wonders why it was that a prominent orthopedic surgeon ends up so far away from where he lived and where he grew up and where he was educated.
What did you discover?
What we discovered was he had had a notorious history of improper conduct, and he had had his license suspended in the state of Oklahoma. He had had his license revoked in the state of Texas. He had a slew of malpractice accidents, that injuries and cases that basically later rendered him uninsurable by the malpractice carriers. He had a problem of addiction to narcotics, and it seemed at the time that he came, and he ultimately, after this incident, had his license revoked from the state of Hawaii. But it seemed that in retrospect, he was getting about as far away from his troubles as he could by relocating to Hilo, Hawaii.
Right. Problem was he was bringing his problems with him, his incompetence, his negligence. So Arturo, unfortunately, had him as his orthopedic spinal surgeon, right? What happened during the surgery?
So at the time of the surgery, when the surgeon got him open and anesthetized and in the operating room, they went to reach for the titanium rods, which they had intended to implant into his spine. And they discovered they were not there. They were not in the kit. The staff had not, and the doctor had not surveyed an inventory of the equipment before he started the surgery, which is a basic proposition that every surgeon must do. And he was decided instead to take a screwdriver, a medical screwdriver that was used to implant these things, and cut the shaft of the screwdriver and emplace that as a substitution for the spine. They immediately called the device provider, who was in Honolulu, and said, I will be on the plane in 45 minutes and I will, fly a new set over to you immediately. But the doctor said, no, I think that I'm going to use this shaft of the screwdriver. So he hacked up the shaft of the screwdriver, implanted it in his spine, and as a substitute for the titanium rods. He explained later that he thought the shaft of the screwdriver was the same titanium material. It was not. It was a different type of metal that
Stainless steel, I think.
Stainless steel. And sure enough, a few days after the surgery, it fractured, and it had to be removed back from his back, and the implantation of the original rods. At the time, nobody knew what he had done. And there was a memo to the hospital that he would be put into a room, and people were not allowed to even go in there and talk to him at all about what had occurred. But a nurse who was then aware of it got the shaft of the screwdriver, which was then placed in a trash can in the surgical suite, and removed it and gathered the pieces, and then went into the patient's room and informed the family what had occurred. The upshot of having these fractured screwdriver shaft in his spine ultimately resulted in his paraplegia, and ultimately he was bedridden and died a year or two later. So instead of having the result that hopefully would have regained his mobility, he died, and nobody would have known about it but for one nurse who had the courage to come forward and challenge what was happening in the hospital and document in the records that she made what actually had occurred.
Yeah, time frame wise, correct me if I'm wrong, your firm sued the doctor, the hospital, the medical device manufacturer 2 years after Arturo died, correct?
Approximately, right.
Now, in that interim period of time, the nurse brought you the evidence, the screwdriver, correct?
Right.
How did she know to bring it to you? Because you had followed.
Well, I think that I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I know that the family contacted me and informed me about the nurse. We contacted the nurse, and this is extraordinarily unusual. You just the typical situation that is what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That's also true about the surgical suite. And so you don't really expect that there will be a whistleblower that is so outraged by the circumstances of what she observed that she decided that it was much more important for not only the family, but everybody else that knew this particular physician, that it all be brought to light, and the hospital was confronted by it.
Yeah, two things to bring up. We've talked about this before. There was a movie back maybe about 1980, The Verdict, Paul Newman. There was a similar situation where a nurse had written down the truth, and the doctors said, you will never get this out, otherwise you'll never work again. So regarding the whistleblower, I have to really admire her for coming forward, because she thought this was wrong, and as a result of this, the patient died. The other thing I want to ask you about is what you said, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, okay? Let's talk about, you've handled enough medical malpractice cases before. What exactly goes on in a surgical operating room? Usually there's a surgeon. There's maybe 2 surgical techs or nurses or something, right?
There's usually an anesthesiologist.
Anesthesiologist. Obviously, they watched this surgeon, Ricketson, do what he was doing. Why didn't any of them come forward? What are they afraid of?
Well, I think that, I hate to say this, but in general, there's kind of a code of, silence about things that occur there, language that, conversations that occur, events that occurred. And everybody is obligated to write down, document things that occur in the surgical suite. But often, they follow the game plan as opposed to come back and openly criticize, the doctors, because there were many people in that surgical suite that said this operation cannot go forward. We must stop everything now by virtue of the fact that we don't have the right rod.
I want to bring up two things. Number one, I think the doctor said because he was 73 years old, because of his health conditions, he didn't want to keep him under general anesthesia for maybe an hour, hour and a half longer while the titanium rods were being transported there. By the way, were the titanium rods transported there?
Well, the medical device representative, promptly got on the plane to.
So they brought them.
Yeah, and I think they brought them, but I think that by that time, the operation was done with him coming up with this kind of, solution, and and I think in many respects. I don't think this doctor was trying to harm this guy by any means. He just had such poor judgment that he wasn't interested in listening to anybody else, or he just was interested in trying to, get by this. And, interestingly, as we research this, because the first question we ask is, given this guy's history, what was it in the credentialing committee that would have a committee of doctors for the hospital say, this guy's approved to go ahead and do orthopedic surgeries? Why wasn't these things looked into and vetted and made a determination whether he was appropriate? Now, in some respects, the hospital needed an orthopedic surgeon. And secondly, the hospital makes a lot of money from an orthopedic surgeon, because if they don't have anybody in there, keeping their surgical suites busy and having people worked in the hospital, they lose money. So they have a big incentive about that. But when we, research the federal standards under Medicare about what are the standards by which you evaluate, one of the standards is they need to make an independent evaluation about the character and competency and the judgment of the physician as part of the credentialing process. And so the lawsuit against the hospital, which we prevailed upon, was that they failed in discharging their obligation in their credentialing process. And we had experts in credentialing saying this is what should have been done.
I've seen this time and time again. You mentioned that he had a drug problem. I've seen a valuable, profitable doctor in hospitals who have, in other cases that we've handled, who have alcohol or drug dependency problems, be offered diversion programs. And the reason that the hospital offers them the program is so they don't have to discipline them. And I've seen a doctor, I saw one in Massachusetts, who fell asleep while he was performing an operation because he had been up all night high on drugs, and an intern had to finish these things. So I've nicknamed this doctor Dr. MacGyver, okay, because in essence he's almost like that. But I do want to point out one thing. There was never, and still today, any evidence to show that this stainless steel screwdriver could be used medically in any medical book whatsoever, right?
Oh, without question. And I think that's something that, even the Dr. Ricketson conceded that it was the wrong thing to do by virtue of the fact that they fractured almost immediately, just within a day or two. So even his assessment that it was the same titanium material that was appropriate was incorrect. The idea that he should wait and install these was incorrect. And it was based not only on a lack of knowledge, but it was a very poor judgment.
Okay, you ended up getting a verdict of $5.7 million.
Correct. Correct.
And that was against all the defendants, correct?
Yeah, in various amounts. The ultimate, the device manufacturer was determined not to be at fault because the jury, I think, determined that nobody should have performed these surgeries, even if they had done that. And that actually went up on appeal, was reversed, and then ultimately the case with the device manufacturer was.
Right. It's almost like the pilot who's doing a check before he goes up in the air, forgetting to check and see if there's any fuel in the plane. That's the pilot's fault. Okay, so congratulations on that. Let me ask you this. You have a lot of people come to you and say, I was harmed by my doctor. Or let me rephrase this. I have seen, and we've seen it in the movies, where a doctor in a white coat, we have a lot of confidence in people who are trying to help us, right? Comes out and said, we did all we could. Okay, but, we couldn't save them, okay? How do you define medical malpractice?
I think there's a legal standard for what is malpractice, which is a violation of the appropriate standard of care that's adopted within that profession. But there's also, I think, a more important issue is what is it that, prompts victims of medical malpractice to go forward? Because I've had clients that have walked in my office absolutely intent on suing a doctor because of all sorts of issues unrelated to the care. And I've had other clients that have walked in and said, I love this guy. I would never sue him, even though the malpractice was so extraordinarily blatant. And, to me, and we look for this in every case, that there is a human aspect. Somebody's not communicating. Somebody's not being candid. Somebody's lying. Somebody cuts off all communication after the surgery. You've heard time and time again that somebody goes in for the surgery and the surgeon never shows up to talk to the family and, sends a nurse to come in and communicate, or they don't take enough time to explain things to a patient. And those are the kind of things, I mean, if you were in my office, you were a physician, and I was, honestly coaching you about how to avoid malpractice, I would say you have to be human, you have to be candid, you have to be honest, and you have to take the time. And if you do all of those things, even though you may make a mistake or even cause injury, you at least have the understanding and often the allegiance of a patient that may have been victimized by a bad judgment or something. So, and each one of these cases, we determine more and more that physicians have a tendency to be very defensive. They change records. They make decisions that are, trying to protect themselves, when in fact, honesty and candor would be their best defense. And, unfortunately, and I've been asked often to speak at grand rounds and talk about medical malpractice to a room full of physicians. And often that's what I tell them. There was a bill passed by the Hawaii legislature that says when a physician says, I'm sorry, that you cannot introduce that as evidence of malpractice. But honestly, that's one of the most effective things that a person can do if there was an error. And it's what patients and other human beings need as they evaluate what their course of conduct is going to be as a result of these types of injuries.
You bring up an interesting point when the doctor says, I'm sorry. First of all, the insurance companies tell them not to say that.
And the lawyers tell them not to say that.
Second of all, there's less lawsuits when a doctor admits, because doctors are human.
Exactly.
They make mistakes.
And they lose sight of the fact that their patients are also human. And they want to be accorded the respect that patients ought to have by having candid, honest information, good, bad, or indifferent.
Well, congratulations on winning the case. Thank God this doctor, Robert Ricketson, is no longer got a license anywhere, from my understanding. And the world is a better place without him. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.